How has society's relationship to imagery evolved from the earliest days of photography to our current mobile photography digital era? That's something I want to explore today. And my name is David Miller. I'm a Los Angeles-based multimedia artist, photographer, educator. I recently did a video bemoaning the ethics of some street photographers who don't have the spine to actually let their subjects know who they are and what they're doing. And absolutely stand by that. If you are looking at the tradition of the great street photographers of the past and sort of seeing yourself as a continuation of Gary Winogrand, Robert Frank, Vivian Mayer, you gotta understand that the era that those street photographers were working in was one where not everybody had a camera, not everybody was able to disseminate their images across the entire world, and there was no such thing as facial recognition technology. Those things really alter what happens when we take photos of people we know, people who are strangers, people at events, things that are a little more journalistic, and have that kind of umbrella covering photographing strangers. But when I was thinking about this, I started thinking about like the greater scope of how photography has shifted in culture. And it's really important to know where we're at and where we used to be, to understand why some things might be ethical, unethical, why quality might have like sharply declined as far as some people are concerned. The early days of photography involved very large cameras and chemistry, and it was just beyond the means of a normal person to get their picture taken, let alone actually be the person who takes the picture. So, we're all kind of familiar with the stories of how people had special portrait sessions and they had to sit so still, like even braced in the neck, because if they moved, then their exposures would come out blurry. The shutter speeds were so slow back then. And that's why everybody looks so unhappy in those very early photographs. And as time progressed, technology got smaller. George Eastman came out with the Kodak Brownie that allowed the average person to own a camera and use silver gelatin film to take photographs before it was, chemistry that might have been explosive or just too difficult to manage. At the same time as the average person started being capable of taking their own photographs, thus taking snapshots, museums started to accept photography as art. So it got elevated that way culturally. And then people were able to travel with their cameras a little more, and that led to things like National Geographic or Edward Curtis spending 30 years photographing Native American cultures. I don't think there was a lot of controversy in the early days where people were, coming to a studio, getting their portraits done, being stone-faced. But when cameras got out and kind of mixed in with the world, and whether there was questions, does this belong next to painting and so on and so forth, that's when you have to think about what you're doing. And to the point of Edward Curtis and National Geographic, I think, and I'm not associating the two. Edward Curtis didn't work for National Geographic. But the idea that there's people and cultures that I don't know that are very interesting and I want to document them or I want to interact with them on a creative level, I don't think that's a bad impulse. I think I've learned so much about the world because people had that impulse and they made documentaries about interesting people. And the real problem is when it comes from just this place of targeting people. And you're interesting, I want something, and I'm gonna go get it. What was Edward Curtis like as a person? I don't know. He He might have had all the best intentions in the world. I'm sure there's writings of his that I could look into and see what his inner workings of his mind are. But the fact that he misrepresented several of the native cultures that he photographed, that he put people in costumes that were not things that were even contemporary back then, the sort of paternal idea that, you know, I'm going to be somewhat of a savior or a curator of this culture. Those things, in hindsight, are not good. And the way that you correct those is that the best people to talk about a culture or their own experience are the people within the culture or the people who are, you know, living that experience. So that's my very broad, condensed version of approaching things like the adventure photographer, the documentary photographer, the street photographer, so on and so forth. If you are somebody who is very curious, who is very open to the input of your subjects, if you are listening to them, if you're presenting them authentically, I think there's nothing wrong at all, and it doesn't make you a culture vulture. But if you're not doing those things, then it is a problem. Getting past that and getting more into when cameras are completely ubiquitous, and we have instant film photography in the 50s. And I grew up in the 80s. The Polaroids that were taken of me during my holidays, birthdays, you know, I still keep those around. Those are still the treasured images that I have. The film images that were, you know, 35 millimeter prints of me, I don't know where they are. I don't know where the original negatives are. And I don't treat them with the same reverence as I treat my instant film prints, because those are, you know, one of a kind and they're complete. I started school in the 90s, and by the time I got done with college in the mid 2000s, it was an 8-9 year process. It was all digital at that point. Although we still had people arguing in the round table of the classrooms whether like digital was even valid, which is silly. It's totally ridiculous conversation. But you know, anytime there's new technology, people want to argue if it's valid, if it's useful, or if it's just like the end of the world. And it's going to change everything we know. Now, what digital technology did was it allowed you to take far more photos than you had the limited capacity when you're working with film. Film cameras, each roll was 36 exposures, 24, 36. And you had to buy it, and you had what you had on hand in your bag. And then if something messed up, you didn't know until you developed it. But digital technology, now it's, you know, 2-hour shoot, 500 photos, easy. And I don't really worry about the limits of my memory in my memory card, because I can just download it, or I have multiple cards. I also could change my ISO between each shot. And I'm able to have instant feedback in the way that I would with a Polaroid. So the level of my craft has gone up, not because I'm trying harder, but because I'm able to course correct on the fly. And because barriers to entry went down, and the more people who are taking photos take more photos, and because a photo sort of tells a story really quickly, those photos now mean a little bit more, even though less is put into them. And what I mean by this is, think of dating apps, how you're allowed to have maybe like 6 photos, and they need to show what a great person you are, how attractive you are, that you're fun to be around. You know, like the weight is put on those photos so much. And some people, maybe to cover up some sort of self-perceived deficiency. They think being more fun means a Snapchat filter. So now there's like a picture of them where they look like a rabbit, you know, and that's supposed to be indicative of their lifestyle and who they are and why you would want to go out with them. Why would you want to mate with them, live forever with them, whatever, you know, the ultimate purposes of a dating site. I mean, we all know what those are, but yeah, I remember when I started photographing models in the late 2000s, they either wanted good portraits of themselves or, you know, there was a goal to be like signed to an agency and be involved in the fashion world or the art world or whatever it is. And that sort of dawn of social media also introduced Tumblr, where there weren't very many limits on photography, if any, in the early Tumblr era. But the art models of that era were the kind of people who traveled around, and they kind of evoked the 1920s and the 1930s, these bohemian type of people. And it wasn't thought of, as many things of the early internet were thought of, as something that was going to follow them around for the rest of their life. Nor was it perceived as a detriment to a future occupation. And as we advance through the 2010s into the 2020s, the photos that are taken have added this like haunting history to them. This is where you have laws now against revenge porn, meaning you could be in a consensual relationship with somebody and send photos or take photos of each other, and then the relationship breaks up, and now the other person, just to be a complete asshole, is gonna fuck up your life, you know, or something that was private is now put out publicly, and it haunts these people for the rest of their lives. They might want to go into government, or they might, you know, they just want to live the rest of their life without thinking about this bad relationship, and it never leaves. The fact that a photo I take of somebody or anyone takes of somebody in the street, in the studio, doesn't really matter. If it's on the internet, a reverse face search could probably find out who that person is, potentially their phone number and their address. It's really upsetting, but the fact is most of society has signed away their privacy and didn't even know they signed away their privacy, or they didn't think they signed away their privacy for the rest of their lives. Now, there's always legal stuff that kind of earns people their privacy back, and ways to, you know, take down Google searches and so on and so forth. But this is why we as photographers should be conscientious of what we're doing, what's the relationship between us and the images we take, the subjects and the images we take of them. This is why when you photograph someone consensually and they look at the photos and they say, oh, I don't like the way I look in this one, you know, you arguing back that it's a great photo and they should like it doesn't win you any battles. It doesn't make the other person like you more. It doesn't make them appreciate how they look in that photo more. And that's just like a consensual relationship between photographer and subject. So if you're thinking about the non-consensual ones where you as the photographer just take and don't give back, and, you know, have it in your head that, well, I better not tell them what I'm doing, or I can't explain what I'm doing to this person. I mean, right there, that's the red flag that what you're doing is unethical. But these are the things that we have to think about. And if we don't think about what we're doing, what the relationship is, what it means to take photos, then I think like maybe you should put your camera away and do something else. Or, you know, just at the very least think about it a little bit, because this is how you're going to get better as a photographer, as an artist, if you think about what you're really doing and make adjustments where needed and be able to explain yourself when called out, because that's what is involved in being an artist in the past, the modern world, and the future. You need to be able to explain on some level why you made these choices, what's it about. The reason why you need to explain it is because if you don't explain it, other people will explain it for you, and you probably won't like their answers. All right, fun talk once again. Best of luck to you in your own creative endeavors. Talk to you next time.